On the night of the 9th of June 1817, an act of disorder and violence occurred in rural Derbyshire in the East Midlands of England. That evening, hundreds of people gathered in the small village of South Wingfield. Some had improvised weapons, scythes and other farming tools. Others had pikes and even guns. They then began marching to the nearby village of Pentrich. The main body of the group was made up of unemployed quarrymen, smiths and textile workers, all led by one Jeremiah Brandreth, he himself an out-of-work stocking maker. As the group were assembling, they went house to house looking for men to join them, and when they arrived at the home of widow Mary Hepworth, she refused to let them in. Enraged, one member of the group smashed a window, through which Brandreth let loose a shot from his gun. This struck and killed a servant. Jeremiah's plan was for revolution. He envisaged his motley crew attacking local barracks, overthrowing the government, wiping out national debt, and ending poverty forever. However, this wasn't to be. News quickly spread of the unrest, and early on the 10th of June, the 15th Regiment of Light Dragoons intervened to break up the mob and arrest dozens of those involved. Trials were soon held, and several individuals were shipped off to the British penal colonies in Australia. Brandreth and two others who led what have become known as the Pentrich riots became the last three people to ever be executed in Britain by being beheaded with an axe. This was one of the most infamous incidents in the history of what was known as the Luddite movement, a social protest movement which emerged in Britain in the late 18th century in response to the advent of industrialization. But who were the Luddites, and how did their actions result in bloodshed at Pentrich in 1817? Something that may make you feel like smashing up machinery is the constant barrage of scams and other online threats you're exposed to every day. However, there is a less destructive option. Today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Chances are that over the festive period you did at least a little bit of online shopping, and who can blame you? But the speed and the convenience comes at the price of potentially exposing your details to scammers and those wishing to track your spending or web surfing habits. Surfshark VPN allows you to encrypt the data you send and blocks unwanted tracking cookies, giving you an extra layer of safety. Using a VPN to change the location your system appears to be logging in from also has the bonus effect of allowing you access to different film catalogues on streaming sites, and potentially even getting lower prices on websites that adjust their pricing dependent on where they think you live. So, to start benefiting right away, just head to surfshark.com/wellinever and you'll get an extra 4 months free. The Luddites emerged as a result of revolutionary changes in the socio-economic life of England that began in the middle of the 18th century. From as early as 1600, a number of innovations were occurring in Britain in terms of creating greater efficiencies in industrial activity. The number of mines and ironworks, for instance, expanded, while in 1712 Thomas Newcomen invented the first atmospheric steam engine that could use steam created from burning wood or coal to produce mechanical energy. As the 1700s progressed, several individuals in England realised that they could increase their profits from the refining of cotton and wool into textiles if they set up large buildings dedicated to textile manufacturing. They called these new buildings factories. Before long, the steam engines were being used to power new giant weaving machines that both increased production and reduced the need for expensive human labour. Thus began the first industrial revolution. Though industrialization would soon stretch into all sectors of developed economies, early on it was primarily concerned with coal mining, metalwork and textile production. But not everyone was delighted at these new developments. As early as the 1770s, there was already growing discontent concerning the manner in which industrialization would deprive people of work they and their families had relied on for generations for their livelihoods. Soon this murmuring would coalesce into a movement. The origins of the Luddites have taken on an almost mythical nature. It is believed that Ned Ludd was their founder, and it was from his name that they derived their moniker. According to Luddite law, Ludd was an apprentice stockinger, the name for a person who produced finished textiles using a stocking frame, a kind of knitting frame which was used to speed up the knitting process by introducing a mechanical element to it. The irony is that the stocking frame was itself not such an old device, having been invented in the late 16th century, so stockingers had not so long ago replaced those who sewed by hand in many parts of England. Ludd was perturbed in the late 1770s when his employer began introducing new and more advanced textile machines to his workshop, such as the spinning jenny, a multi-spindle frame device that had been invented in the mid-1760s and which was a cornerstone of the advent of the first industrial revolution. The spinning jenny was far more efficient than previous devices and would soon see a single stockinger able to carry out the work of 3 or 4 people. Ludd apparently was unhappy with the introduction of such machines and seemed unwilling to learn how to use one. It's said that his master was advised that a little whipping was required to make him conform. However, this only served to enrage Ned, who instead of learning how to use the new machines, took a great hammer and destroyed them. At least this is one version of the story. The first written account of this dates to 1811, when it appeared in the pages of the Nottingham Review, but there is nothing to independently verify these events, which purportedly occurred further back in 1779. Because of this, we can't be sure if Ned Ludd was actually a real person or not. Whatever the truth of Ned Ludd's existence and actions, we do know that his story took on a mythical element in the decades that followed. By the beginning of the 19th century, there was an entire movement of individuals in England who were dedicated to destroying the machines which they believed would soon replace them entirely in the new factories. Over time, these industrial skeptics became known as Luddites, and they referred to Ned Ludd as King Ludd or General Ludd. Those who destroyed machinery would often give his moniker as their name when captured by authorities. While some believe that there were Luddites operating from as early as the 1770s, in reality, they were primarily active in the 1800s and 1810s. During these years, groups of Luddites vandalized industrial machinery in factories and workshops across England. This then escalated from 1811 onwards into acts of violent riot and affray in individual towns and cities. Across 1811 and 1812, there was extensive Luddite violence in Nottinghamshire and other places in the north of England where the main industrial centres were. Before long, the group had become highly organised, with local associations meeting at night to plan their activities and engage in quasi-military drills. Riots ensued, some resulting in death either of rioters or those who dared to use the new machinery. On a more subtle level, the workers simply sabotaged machines in the factories they worked in clandestinely. Thus, in the early 1810s, the Luddites became a growing movement and a worrying one for the British government. There were major underlying reasons for this. Since 1792, Britain had been almost constantly at war since the British, Prussians and Austrians intervened in France in an effort to crush the French Revolution as it became more and more radical. In 1803, the French Revolutionary Wars had morphed into the Napoleonic Wars after the rise to power of Napoleon Bonaparte as first consul and then emperor of the French. By 1807, with the signing of the Treaty of Tilsit, Napoleon had conquered or brought on side the vast majority of continental Europe, with only Russia and Britain unvanquished. Bonaparte had then introduced an economic boycott of Britain called the Continental System, which required all of Europe to refuse to trade with the British. The Continental System and over 2 decades of nigh-on continuous warfare had impacted greatly on the British economy, and the kinds of ordinary workers who joined the Luddites in the early 1810s were worst hit by the French blockade. In an age before people knew how economic cycles worked, industrial workers had blamed the machines in their factories when people were let go owing to wider economic concerns, worried that they would be next. This only served to fuel the fire of the Luddite movement. Their protest peaked in the mid-1810s. Indeed, the Pentrich riots in the summer of 1817 were one of the last major recorded incidents associated with the group. Their eventual demise came down to 3 primary reasons. Firstly, there was the British government's response to the lawlessness and violence that were a growing aspect of the riot. As early as 1812, the Destruction of Stocking Frames Act was passed by Parliament, one which aimed to increase the legal penalty for sabotaging or vandalising industrial machinery associated with the textile industry. In early 1813, a mass trial in the city of York saw many Luddites convicted for crimes of this nature, emphasising the government's determination to crack down on the unrest. Secondly, the broader economic conditions which led to the unrest improved. The Napoleonic Wars had come to an end in the summer of 1815 with the final defeat of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. After a period of economic recovery, trade boomed again in the later parts of the decade and into the 1820s. The shift towards ever greater amounts of free trade between countries like Britain and France in the mid-19th century, along with the spread of the Industrial Revolution to places like Germany, Belgium and the Dutch Republic, soon saw living standards improving all over Europe. This led to a decline in the kind of disenchantment which led to the Luddite movement in the first place. Thirdly, and finally, generational change simply took effect. As the older generations who had grown up in an age before the spread of the new machines grew old and passed away, they were replaced by younger people who had never known anything different and were acclimatized to living in a world of steam machines and mechanical efficiencies. Moreover, they soon learned that new jobs, building factories, working in the ever-growing numbers of coal mines or laying down railway tracks from the late 1820s onwards would replace the old jobs that were lost. Thus, there was little Luddite movement to speak of from the 1820s onwards. However, the movement left behind an indelible mark on our historical imaginations. The term Luddite is still used to describe someone who refuses to accept social or technological change. In the years ahead, as artificial intelligence begins to enter more widespread use in the economy, there will probably be more frequent reference to the Luddite movement in public discourse. If we can take any solace from history, the one thing that should reassure people is that the Industrial Revolution led to a change in jobs, not an overall decline in the amount of work available. Though, if you wanted to face these new developments as the Luddites did, we wouldn't blame you. Thank you for watching, and thank you to this episode's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Head to surfshark.com/wellinever to get 4 months free. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, well, I never.